Humans have always had a fascination with time. It's one of the constants of life and something we're always hoping to outrun. There's an inherent desire embedded into us to control our movements through time, whether it be travelling back to change some event to end up in a better today, or to the future to see what lies ahead of us. Many of us would jump at the chance to travel through time. We have countless works of fiction dedicated to the idea. Movies, books, TV shows, and more, all exploring that same idea, asking ourselves, what if? However, for 5,500 years, humans have actually had a form of time travel available to us, and it has become one of our greatest tools, allowing for tremendous scientific and technological advances, as well as cultural phenomenons, and even as tools of war. Welcome to Of Science and Sorcery, the show where we look back at the magic found within the scientific and technological advancements humans have made. This is the podcast where we aim to prove that reality can be every bit as magical as fiction. In today's episode, we'll be looking at what I consider to be one of humanity's greatest strengths and one of the only ways we have to travel through time. Yes, today we'll be looking at the development of written language. I know what you might be asking. How is writing time travel? Well, let's look at it through our magical lens and take it for what it allows us to do. Because of written languages, humans have been able to send their thoughts, ideas, feelings, and dreams and send them into the future. And this has become one of our most powerful tools. This also works in reverse as well. Writing allows us to look back into time. We have the ability to learn from those who came before us and not spend our time having to re-figure out everything that they have already learned. It blows my mind that we have the ability to learn about people who lived aeons ago. Alexander the Great was born in July 356 BC, and we know incredible amounts of details about his life, his accomplishments, and his effect on the world. Heck, even the moral code which billions of people base their lives around originate from written books that have survived thousands of years. So let's start to dig deeper into the origins of written language. Funnily enough, it's partly because of the development of writing that we are now able to know and understand the development of writing. The oldest written language is Sumerian and is the ancient ancestor to many of the languages we use today, such as English. Sumer was the area that is now present-day Iraq, and the beginning of its written language can be traced back 10,000 years to around 8,000 BC. The evolution of the Sumerian written language can be divided into 4 key phases, which we will take a look at. The first phase was more of a precursor to actual writing, and that was the use of clay tokens in the form of shapes such as cones, spheres, and cylinders. These tokens were used as a sort of code to identify and keep track of goods. Each shape would represent a physical good. For example, a cone represented a small measure of grain, and ovoids represented jars of oil. There is thought to be a range of 300 different types of counters that were used, which made it feasible to represent a considerable range of goods. We have evidence of these tokens gathered in archaeological sites, and they date between 8,000 and 3,000 BC. The token system had barely anything in common with spoken languages, other than that, like a word, a token stood for one concept. However, speech allows for the expression of abstract thoughts and ideas, whereas the tokens were limited to physical items. The token system also made no use of syntax. There was a direct one-to-one correspondence between a token and an item. Tokens were never combined to allow for a wider range. If you were to have 3 cones and 3 ovoids, it would just be directly translated to 3 baskets of grain and 3 jars of oil. After around 4,000 years, Sumerian reached the second evolutionary stage, as the token system led to writing, albeit much different to what we're used to today, but still a form of writing nonetheless. It occurred when tokens, which were used to most likely represent a debt, were stored in a clay package until payment. This had a distinct disadvantage that the tokens were held inside, making it hard to take count. Therefore, accountants started to impress the tokens on the outside of the clay before enclosing them inside, so that the contents could be easily verified. These markings were the first signs of writing. Once a system of impressed signs was understood, around 3200 BC, the system transitioned to solely using clay tablets with the token impressions and no longer using the physical 3D tokens. They had the same meaning as the tokens previously used and were still used in the same one-to-one relationship. Pictographs, which were signs that represented the tokens but were traced with a stylus rather than impressed, started to appear around 3100 BC. These pictographs were an important step in the development of writing, as they finally marked the move from using one-to-one correspondence of tokens to express plurality to using numerals. For example, 33 jars of oil were shown by the pictographic sign for a jar of oil preceded by 3 circles and 3 wedges, with a circle representing 10 and a wedge representing 1. This represents a movable way from relying on literal correspondence and allowing for some slightly abstract concepts. Circa 3000 BC, the third evolutionary stage of written languages was reached, as new state regulations required the names of people who generated or received merchandise were recorded on tablets. People's names were written using logograms, which are signs that represent a word in a language. For example, a common Sumerian name, An gives life, combined a star, the logogram for An, god of heaven, and an arrow, because the words for arrow and life were homonyms. The verb was not recorded, but inferred, which was easy because the name was common. These logograms allowed for the Sumerian written language to have uses other than just accounting. They were often found in the tombs of the royal cemetery, which would record the person's name and their title. Sumerians believed that this would immortalize their name and provide them with eternal life, which is an interesting thought as we examine how writing allows ideas to far outlive their creators. If a deceased person were important enough to have a statue of them, the statue would often be inscribed with longer descriptions, including things like the name of a temple or god to whom the statue was dedicated, and sometimes a plea for life after death, which would include a verb. These were the beginnings of syntax in writing, and bring written languages one step closer to reflecting speech. The first alphabet was invented circa 1500 BC, and represents the fourth stage in the evolution of writing. This alphabet is referred to as Proto-Sinaitic, and originated in what is now present-day Lebanon. The Proto-Sinaitic alphabet consisted of 22 letters, all of which were consonants, and each stood for a single speech sound. The system was based on acrophony, where signs were used to represent the first letter of the word they stood for. For an example, an ox head was A, as the word for it was Alpu, or a house was B, as the word for it was Betu. This reduced complexity from the previous system considerably, as it shrunk the 300 or so previously used logograms into 22 letters, which could combine any number of words, representing all manner of concepts. Phoenician merchants operating on the coast of present-day Syria and Lebanon played a crucial role in the spread of the alphabet. They were the ones responsible for bringing this consonant-based alphabet to Greece, circa 800 BC. The Greeks perfected this alphabet by adding letters for vowels, resulting in an alphabet of 27 letters, which was a large improvement for representing spoken words, as all sounds were recorded. Because the alphabet was only invented once, all of the alphabets of our world, including Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and Cyrillic, all derive from the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet. Of course, there are still changes that have happened since then, but for the most part, these 4 stages show the core evolutionary steps of written language. I'll be the first to admit that there isn't much magic involved in the development of written languages. Instead, writing is the magical tool that we use every day, and the magic is found in its applications. One of humanity's greatest strengths is that we have the ability to preserve our knowledge. What one person learns can be passed down to future generations. Spoken language allows us to do this as well, but it's a lot more susceptible to loss as it relies strongly on human memories, which can be faulty. Writing allows us to capture our knowledge and preserve it, causing it to travel through time. Because we developed the ability to write, we developed the ability to have each generation stand on the shoulders of the previous one. Growing up, I didn't have to reinvent algebra or chemistry. I was simply able to learn from books that were written and teachers who had read books themselves. Because these things have already been discovered, they no longer have to be rediscovered, and we can focus our time and energy on new discoveries, thus allowing our advancements to continue to grow and evolve. Even when a written language dies out and has no one living who can read it, we can still decipher much of what was written and learn from it. The Egyptian hieroglyphs are an example of this. We've been able to decipher almost all of the hieroglyphs we've come across. On the flip side of preserving knowledge, writing has allowed for the incredible access to fiction. Humans can't be all facts and figures, and our ability to share fictional stories with one another helps expand our imagination, creativity, and culture. One of the reasons for this podcast is because I absolutely love the fictional worlds people have imagined and wanted to replicate that love for imaginary worlds with a real one. Fiction plays a huge part in shaping who we are, how we view the world, and what we strive to achieve. Essentially, written language allowed for magic to develop. Spoken language is definitely allowed for the sharing of fictional stories, and before writing, that was an incredibly common practice. To sit around the fire and regale each other with the stories of gods, heroes, and mythical creatures. However, writing allowed for the widespread proliferation of these stories and for them to survive the rivers of time. The Odyssey was written well over 3,000 years ago, and yet we still continue to read it, our imaginations taking us back in time through the time machine of Homer's writing. There's much more that could be said about how we use written languages today, but I feel like we all share that knowledge and appreciation. What I think instead I would like to leave you with is hopefully that being able to read and write isn't something that we should take for granted. It's something that took over 8,000 years to develop, and even then, most people didn't have that ability. It's really only in the last several hundred years that it has become widespread. Reading and writing is a powerful tool that we have at our disposal, and something that holds a lot of power. Words have the ability to shape entire generations, to unlock the future and the past, and to cause incredible change in the present. I think we should all be a bit more appreciative of our ability to communicate through writing and try to take responsibility for how we use that, for with great power comes great responsibility.